Welcome to Episode 7, Training AI Through Standards and Feedback. Here, training means improving practical work by communicating standards, reviewing output, correcting problems, and preserving what should guide the next task. It does not mean retraining the underlying AI model. This lesson follows prompt writing and CRED. We now move from one well-explained request to repeated work that should become more consistent. The next episode will apply these habits to practical documents, media, tools, and decisions. Everyday training is practical communication. You explain the standard, review the output, identify a problem, revise the instruction, and preserve the useful lesson. You are shaping the working process, not changing the model's technical training data. A new assistant needs explicit standards. Begin with a draft, explain what is unacceptable, describe the teachable correction, and preserve the rule for reuse. Speed without standards creates repeated inconsistency, clear expectations create a basis for improvement. Training accumulates through repeated work. Establish the standard, create a result, correct the problem, review what changed, and preserve the confirmed rule. The sequence becomes valuable because each task informs the next one. Do not make AI guess the same standard again. Scattered corrections disappear when a conversation ends. A preserved standard records the principle and applies it to later work, allowing future tasks to begin with clearer context. A useful correction contains 3 parts. State what requires improvement, explain why it matters to the audience or task, and define the standard that should guide the revision. A correction without a reason is difficult to generalize. Weak feedback says only that something is wrong or unattractive. Training-oriented feedback identifies the specific defect, explains its effect, and separates the relevant items. Specific feedback teaches the desired result and the reasoning behind it. A skilled user does more than ask. The user requests a draft, reviews it, diagnoses the problem, corrects the instruction, and confirms the revision. Prompt skill and review skill develop together. An imperfect answer can become training material. Instead of deleting it immediately, identify what failed, explain the missing criterion, revise the request, and compare the new result. Failure becomes useful when it reveals an unspoken standard. Repeated revision communicates expectations. Change tone, format, terminology, depth, or audience deliberately. Do it again gives little guidance, naming the dimension to change creates a reusable lesson. Check whether the standards were understood. Ask for a summary of the rules before the next task, separating confirmed principles, items that still require review, and directions that were rejected. Review that summary before relying on it. AI's claim that it understands is not proof of training. Inspect the evidence, assign another task using the same standards, test the result, and compare it with the requirement. Performance under a new task is more informative than a confident statement. This example shows incomplete content. A slide may look polished while omitting a required example or completion. The preserved standard should require every slide to deliver a teachable point through a useful visual, example, comparison, or activity. This example shows mixed classifications. Independent concepts were arranged as though they were connected stages, creating a false relationship. The standard requires separate concepts to remain separate unless a real causal or procedural connection exists. Graphics can disturb a layout even when the illustration is attractive. Useful feedback identifies the overlap, missing breathing space, disrupted balance, and whether the visual supports the text. Visual standards must be concrete enough to verify. Terminology can mislead. Notice the unclear term, explain how it may be misunderstood, select a more accurate alternative, and record that preferred usage. A terminology standard prevents meaning from drifting across many outputs. Chapter roles can overlap when similar explanations appear in several sections. Define the role of each chapter, remove repetition, and assign every topic to the place where it contributes most clearly. Structure is a standard that can be reviewed and taught. Strong instruction habits make expectations explicit, diagnose the cause of a problem, preserve reusable standards, and record decisions. These habits turn repeated work into a more reliable operating pattern. Standards can become scattered across files, chats, corrections, and approvals. Organization restores context by collecting the current rules, decisions, and materials needed for the next task. You can ask AI to analyze your instruction method. Request the strengths, recurring gaps, and standards that should be made more precise. Treat the analysis as evidence to inspect, not as unquestionable truth. Test training with a new task. Assign unfamiliar work that should follow the same standards, observe the first attempt, compare it with the criteria, and record anything still missing. A new task reveals whether the working pattern is actually reusable. Do not assume every detail will be remembered automatically. Memory features can fail or omit context. Restore important standards explicitly through confirmed rules, revisions, decisions, and the next task's requirements. A handoff summary should record the work, the standards, confirmed decisions, unresolved risks, and the next task. This converts scattered history into an operating record that another session or collaborator can understand. Use a reusable handoff request to organize decided standards, required revisions, files to keep, files to discard, and information needed next. Separate confirmed principles from items still under review, then inspect the summary before using it. Now convert dissatisfaction into a standard. Name what disappointed you, explain why it matters, state the standard for future work, and decide what must be followed from now on. This turns a reaction into usable guidance. The practical goal is to turn one correction into a reusable working standard, name the problem, explain its importance, state the rule, and record it for the next task. Episode 8 applies this approach to practical work. The QR code opens the optional companion guide.